Well, I think the part of it which I have seen as a Renaissance has occurred in the last 50 years. It's certainly true that there were technical developments earlier than that, but the most dramatic have occurred since the Second World War. And they resulted, in my opinion, they resulted from the pioneering efforts of Dean Turman to build Stanford up as a world-class technical university and to attract the electronics industry to this area. Those two actions which he took have stimulated a renaissance in this area for which there's really no comparison anywhere in the world.
Hello, I'm Nan Geschke, your host of the Los Altos History Show. That clip shown at the beginning of the show is from a new video documentary titled Silicon Valley, a 100-Year Renaissance. Our guest tonight is the producer and director of that documentary, John McLaughlin. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Nan.
Thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
John is the founder of the Santa Clara Valley Historical Association. His roots are in Palo Alto, although he's lived other places. His background includes export management and publishing. John, I find it kind of intriguing that you compared our modern technological age to that of the Renaissance. What are the parallels?
I think the main one is during the Renaissance period was the first time in pretty much recorded human history that civilization went through a very accelerated change. And we're doing the same thing now. There's a lot of little parallels you could look at. One of the most obvious is during the Renaissance period. Gutenberg's known for coming out with the printing press. About 30, 40 years later, Aldus and a number of Venetian and Italian printers started producing small books. And in doing the small books, they accelerated learning, or accelerated literacy, literally, throughout Western Europe. In our own time, the computer disk, the computer was invented with a ramic disk back in 1952 in San Jose. And about 30, 40 years later, and Apple was the leader in that, miniaturized everything, very much like the book, and created a literacy movement in computers, in internet, however far that's going to go. And just those two parallels are very, very strong.
So you have drawn this comparison, and you must have been thinking about this for a long time. How did you get involved in producing the video on Silicon Valley?
Actually, Palo Alto was having its 100-year centennial celebration, and I was on the history committee to come up with a few things. And I'd intended on doing some type of book, some type of publication about that. And then I went home one afternoon and clicked on the TV, and there was the Ken Burns Civil War series.
Oh, wonderful.
And it was an incredible film. And he was able to take old photos and really bring them to life. And it took me about 15, 20 seconds. And I thought, I can do that. I know enough about old photos and a little bit about photography. And so that's how it got started. And initially, I went back to the Centennial Board, and they gave me the go-ahead. Mm-hmm. And about a month later, they came back with a list of conditions which essentially would doom any project. The right to whoever you interview, you can't raise money, all of those things. So, but by that time, I'd gotten started and was pretty committed to getting it done. So the Palo Alto Historical Association, who I'd worked with and was familiar with the project, came in and offered to give me full access to all their photographs, which was a great start.
Oh, that was.
And a co-sponsorship. So we got started, and And it worked.
And it worked very well. I just wanted to show the viewers the video, which is available now in bookstores around the peninsula, and other places too, right, John?
No, actually, it's in the peninsula. It's being distributed through national distributors, and that takes a couple of months. But initially, for the South Peninsula, for the next month or so, the local bookstores have it. The local independents, primarily. Hopefully, in 2 or 3 months, you can buy it in New York or New Orleans, wherever.
Fabulous, great. Now, we live in this technological boom area, and it's been this way for a while. Why did it get started here? Why didn't it start somewhere else in the United States? Is there something special about the Palo Alto and the whole peninsula that sort of spurred this whole revolution on?
Yes, Santa Clara Valley is thought of, or was thought of, as a place of orchards and great agricultural area. But Leland Stanford, who, by the way, was one of the 19th century's greatest entrepreneurs, but he was also a politician and great philanthropist. When he decided to found Stanford University, he and his wife Jane, they gave everything to the university, which was a tremendous amount of money. I think if you took a comparison today and Bill Gates decided to give all of his money to a university, they'd have a tremendous head start. He also
I
believed,
would say.
yeah. He also believed very much in the application of learning. And instead of a lot of Eastern universities, European universities, you'd learn ancient Greek, you'd learn philosophy.
Sure.
Stanford really believed in a place of learning that you could apply that as practical knowledge. And so they searched the country and found a guy named David Starr Jordan, who was a university president in Indiana, to come out and be the first president of Stanford University. And he very much promoted that and believed in that. And
I think we have a clip from your video, so I think that our viewers would find really interesting. So why don't we just roll to that clip right now?
Okay.
We'll come back on.
Okay.
The Stanford selected Dr. David Starr Jordan to be the university's first president. Jordan was serving as president of the University of Indiana when the senator and Mrs. Stanford came to call, delivered to Bloomington in their private railroad car. Jordan accepted the Stanford's offer. He was president of the university for 21 years. Jordan was responsible for recruiting a large part of Stanford's pioneer faculty. He lured outstanding teachers from Cornell University and other eastern campuses, creating a high-powered science and engineering faculty that was to be the school's hallmark.
I think the philosophy here has always been, I mean, way back before Turman to the time of David Starr Jordan, the philosophy here has been that if you have a good idea and it has some potential for accomplishing human benefit, you ought to get it out there where it can be of practical use. This is a place that was formed at the time when the West was still a frontier. Practical knowledge was highly valued. Senator Stanford valued it highly. And the university has always had an affection for application as well as theory.
So, John, you know, that clip showed us how important Stanford University was, and still is, I know. But there were other influences too that sort of contributed to this. There was the advancement in radio engineering and some of the other businesses too. So, what were some of those businesses? Would we recognize their names now?
Probably not. There's one in particular called Federal Electric that started right about 1909 or so by a guy named Cyrus Elwell, who had gotten into the business trying to get something called the Poulsen arc from a Denmark inventor, and he licensed it and he brought it back to the States. And Federal Electric became quite a large business. And one of the people that joined it a few years after it got started was Lee DeForest, who is considered the father of modern electronics. And they built up Federal as one of the top radio engineering companies in the country. The technology, and this is back in 1913, 1914, the technology in this area at the time was the best in the world in radio engineering. Eventually, Federal Electric got bought out by IT&T and then was moved back to New Jersey. Many of the engineers stayed here, which set the stage for another company that started up, and that was in 1939, Hewlett Packard, because they had this.
We know it well.
And because
area.
they had a bedrock of engineers that had practice, who had worked, who were actually had been out of work for quite a while. And that became the core of Hewlett Packard's early employees. Excuse me.
And there was a very important person too that kind of sparked that whole that whole sort of philosophy too, wasn't there?
Right, Frederick E. Turman. I wish I had met the gentleman. Frederick Turman was went to Palo Alto High School. Was born. I don't know if he was born here. He was raised in Palo Alto. His father was the inventor of the Binet IQ test. And Turman started the Department of Electrical Engineering, or taught the first
I think we have another clip on here. Do you want to run it?
Let's see that.
Okay, good. Let's do that. Let's roll that clip now.
While other universities touched the commercial sector with uncertain fingertips, Stanford reached out and grabbed it by the collar. Stanford President David Starr Jordan had invested his own money in Cy Elwell's company, and then beat the drum to draw other faculty investors. Later, Fred Turman continued to forge the links between the school and local business, working with former university president Wallace Stirling to establish the Stanford Research Park. If there's a single person directly responsible for the rise of Silicon Valley, it may very well be Frederick Turman. It seems to have been Turman who struck the first true entrepreneurial spark that started the high-tech grass fire. After graduating from Palo Alto High School, he enrolled at Stanford, where he earned degrees in chemistry and electrical engineering. Turman taught radio engineering at Stanford and soon started the University Radio Communications Laboratory. A well-liked teacher, he attracted bright students from around the country.
He was offering a course in what today we call electronics, but which then we called radio engineering. And so I thought one ought to be started, and I gave a course 1 year, and then the next year I stretched it so that it was a course each term. And that was the beginning.
No, John, we know that Turman was the spark, but there were other sparks. I know we mentioned Hewlett and Packard. They were all interconnected, I think.
Yes, there was actually quite a cottage industry out in the peninsula up in San Francisco during the time before Hewlett Packard. But when Hewlett Packard started, that was the beginning of I think modern Silicon Valley as we know it. Turman got the two guys, Hewlett and Packard together, encouraged them, guaranteed a bank loan for them. Was very much a full-time consultant on their business early on.
Mm-hmm. In much the same way that professors now do the same thing at Stanford, I understand. That spirit of collaboration still exists.
I think it's carried on, and it's still there, very much so. And some of the modern companies will get to where that's been a very important part of their success and development.
But Hewlett and Packard were pioneers.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And as Bill Hewlett has told a number of people, it was like the beginning of a supernova. And there were others after him, but Hewlett Packard was definitely a very seminal point in Silicon Valley. Without Hewlett Packard, I don't know if it would have happened.
That's interesting. I think we have another clip to show,
Sure.
sort of about that whole phenomenon. So let's roll that clip now.
Okay.
By 1939, the electronics industry was entering a period in which higher standards and more precise measurements were demanded. For Hewlett and Packard, this was the opportunity they've been looking for. As a graduate student, Hewlett had designed a device that produced controllable and accurate electrical signals at a predetermined frequency. He called the device an audio oscillator. Used to measure frequencies in the audible range, it would be invaluable to manufacturers of such products as loudspeakers. Turman also believed in the commercial potential of the audio oscillator. He helped to arrange a $1,000 bank loan to finance the pair's new venture. Turman later recalled that he could always tell how the young company was doing. If the car was in the garage, he said, there was no backlog. But if the car was in the driveway, business was good.
But the war changed all that. The war made electronics a universal commodity, and that's when things really started to happen.
About being at the right place at the right time. And essentially, we were there. We didn't know it at the time, but that's what happened, because we decided to concentrate on electronic instruments. Red Turman and Bill and I had a sort of a game. He'd invite these people out to tell them what a great place this was going to be. Then he'd send them over to see us, and we'd back him up with that. So it was kind of a 1-2 punch of each.
The company's management style was intensely oriented toward its employees. The HP way, as it came to be known, was a new kind of corporate culture based on trust of the individual and a determination to share the company's success with its workers. It included profit sharing and one of the most comprehensive employee benefits programs ever seen.
I think any of us particularly in the computer industry and in Silicon Valley, would look to people like David Packard and Bill Hewlett certainly as role models that we'd all give anything we could, I suppose, to be compared favorably with those two gentlemen.
HP had the HP way, and they had a list of their values. And the first one was, we need to make a profit or else we can't keep this company going. But after that, they got into how they wanted to treat individuals and conduct their corporate life.
I think that's an interesting story. I think the mention of the garage is, legendary around the valley here. I mean, the tech in San Jose, was first known as the garage, and so I must have really sort of stemmed from that Hewlett Packard condition. So anyway, there were some other interesting people, though, besides Turman and Hewlett Packard, and I know we've talked with Ward about it when Ward was here, Ward Winslow, John's partner here. They collaborated on this book called The Making of Silicon Valley, 100-Year Renaissance. And we interviewed Ward last year, and we talked a little bit about Shockley and that whole phenomenon. I think it's sort of one of the best stories around. So what can you share with us, John?
Well, Bill Shockley was an absolutely brilliant man. However, he started out, or I should say he got some of his education in Palo Alto, and he left when he was about 15 years old. His father was a professor at Stanford, and he kept up a correspondence with one of the other professors at Stanford. So many years later, when Bill Shockley won a Nobel Prize for inventing the transistor, it was one of the quantum leaps in history that this thing could be done. And he put out the word that he wanted to start his own company. And Arnold O. Beckman, who owned Beckman Instruments, that's up on Sand Hill Road in Silicon Valley, had agreed to fund him. So Shockley put out the word to graduate schools all over the country. He wanted the cream of the electronic engineers to come work for him, and they did. And he set up Shockley Electronics, but Bill Shockley was not a very good people person. That's definitely true. He didn't have any management experience, nor did he have any business experience, but he was a great scientist. So his company actually failed miserably in many levels. One of the things that happened was that the 8 top scientists that he had with him left. And I think we have
They were known as the Traitorous Eight.
Or the Fairchild Eight, depending on which side of the fence you're on.
Oh, okay.
And they stopped to form Fairchild Semiconductor. We have Gordon Moore, actually, which it talks about that, and Gordon was one of those people.
And I think we have another clip that features Gordon talking about that whole phenomenon. So let's roll to the clip.
Okay.
But we were trying to make the transistor that was his original objective. Dr. Shockley thought that he could make an inexpensive silicon transistor and set up the company to pursue that goal. And while he had fantastic physical intuition about what was going to go on in the materials and what the physics was going to be of the structure we were building, he had some peculiar ideas on how to motivate people. So we got into some peculiar problems in those early days. Eventually ending up with him suggesting that every member of the company take a lie detector test to see who was responsible for some rather minor thing that had occurred in the operation.
By late 1957, 7 of Shockley's stars, including Vic Greenwich, Gene Horney, Gordon Moore, Sheldon Roberts, Julius Plank, Jay Last, and Eugene Kleiner, were looking seriously for a way out. They were determined to stay together as a group, but there were no companies willing to hire them all, so they decided to start a company of their own. Venture capital was scarce on the West Coast at that time, so the young scientists called on Kleiner's uncle's New York City-based investment house for help in finding companies interested in investing in a semiconductor operation. The firm assigned Arthur Rock to help arrange the venture funding for the fledgling company.
Well, I came out to California. That was the first time I'd ever been in California. That was '57. And we decided to agree to form a company. And then go around to various corporations and try and raise the $1.5 million which they felt they needed.
We sat down, literally sat down with the Wall Street Journal and went through all of the companies on the New York Stock Exchange to identify those that we thought might be interested in a semiconductor operation. We identified some 32 companies, as I recall, that we thought were likely prospects. And the investment bankers went out and talked to all 32 companies, and all 32 turned the idea down. And then, quite by accident, they ran into Sherman Fairchild, who really was a technology buff. He loved new technology. He had originally set up a company to do aerial surveying, and he had to make both an airplane company and a camera company to have everything he needed to do the aerial surveying. His apartment was full of all the latest electronic gadgets. Anyhow, he introduced the investment bankers to the chairman of Fairchild Camera and Instrument. And they took a look at the group and decided they were willing to risk a modest investment to see if we could do anything. So we got caught up with Fairchild, and that was the formation of Fairchild Semiconductor.
We know that there have been scores and scores of companies that have sort of been spawned out of Fairchild, and the success stories are a legion, but there's also a downside, isn't there, John?
Yes, one of the things that makes this area absolutely unique in the world is that you don't have the fear about going out and taking a risk that you would somewhere else. And entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley have a feeling that they can go out and they can follow their vision, and if they fail, it's okay. They can get back up and start again. They can start another company. They can go to work for somebody else. Where in most of the world, you can't do that. And that holds people back. There are dozens of, well, hundreds of very successful people that probably wouldn't have made it except for a little bit of luck. But what they've given the world is far greater than all of the failures combined.
That's interesting, isn't it? I think we have a clip that kind of exemplifies that as well, don't we?
Yeah, at least one.
Yeah, let's roll it.
Okay.
Failure is a prerequisite to success. I went all the way through school, kindergarten through PhD as an A student. And at Stanford, I was inventing things which I was trying to use as a basis for a company. And I invented a technology, really strange technology, which etched silicon along crystal facets and actually formed transistors in little V-groove notches that were 1/100th the size of a human hair. Technology had some promise in its day. And the first job I took, American Microsystems, 5 years and 17 days I worked there in that technology. I lost $20 million for them, and it crashed big time.
There were probably 10 or 12 times during the last 12 years that failure didn't seem imminent. Failure seemed accomplished. It was, there were times when we walked in and we thought we had money raised. We went into the venture capital thinking we were getting a check. They sat down and said, we're not investing. We thought, oh, holy mackerel, the company's going to run out of cash. There were times when, I remember the computer vision deal. Apollo at the time had Calma, Autotrol, and Mentor Graphics all signed up, and CV was the biggest CAD company in the world. And the CV, I remember being in Vinod's office, the CV buyer called us from Boston. Vinod picked up the phone, and he's an Indian guy, and he went pale, to tell you how. And I said, he hung up the phone, and I said, well, what was that? He said, that was the CV buyer. They said, this is formal communication that we've chosen Apollo, and we're breaking off all formal communications with Sun. We're going to Apollo. And we got, holy mackerel, that means the whole CAD market has gone to Apollo. Vinod got on a red eye with some people in a big proposal, and we flew out there and sat in the lobby. Nobody come talk to us. Finally, a guy came down and said, we read your proposal, it's pretty interesting. Of course, we gave them warrants in the company, all our technology. We threw everything in but the kitchen sink and our firstborns. And they said, go away. We can't be seen in the lobby with you. We'll call you in a couple of days. So they flew back home, having never met anybody. They called us a couple of days and said, the deal isn't going very well with Apollo right now. Meet us in Chicago. If anybody reads about this, you're in deep trouble. We flew to Chicago, had an all-night negotiating session with word processors in the room, signed the deal the next morning, announced it 2 days later, and Apollo went, what happened? So we'd really, I mean, if there ever was a moment in time back in the 83, 84 time frame when we snatched victory from the jaws of defeat, it was that particular deal.
Speaking of time, John, we're out of it. It's just been so delightful having this chat with you this evening about the history of Silicon Valley. And I know it's been a very large project for you, but it's going to mean a lot to the Valley in the future to have this.
Been a great pleasure.
Have this video. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I hope you can come back with your next project.
Okay.
And to our viewers, good night and thanks for viewing. We'll see you the next time.